GT Holidays, South India's #1 travel brand.
Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. The Chennai Silks, let the celebrations begin.
As the end credits rolled, about 60% of the audience members were on their feet that were turned towards the exit door, but eyes fixed to the screen. Were they waiting for a glimpse of part 2, or did they want something more to be fully satisfied? Hello, this is Garada Plus. I'm Kairam Vaashi, and this is about Prashanth Neel's Salaar Part 1 Ceasefire. I want to start with a disclaimer. It was an early morning, first day, first show of an action film of one of the legitimate pan-India stars, which meant one half of the dialogues was deeply buried under the whistling, clapping and cheering. I could hear only what I was allowed to hear. Salaar for me was a combination of 3 tracks. The major one was The World of Khansar, which was the most interesting and the most fleshed out track. The medium one was the friendship track taken from Ugram. It was entertaining, written and performed better than in Ugram. Deva and Varada are childhood friends. Because of something that Deva does, Varada earns his respect and pride. And because of something that Varada does later, Deva and his mother are able to stay alive. Because of this help, Deva vows to be Varada's Salaar, meaning commander. The third track of the film is that of the heroine. This was the weakest part of the film, and because it summed up to only a few minutes in this 2-hour 55-minute long film, it didn't bother me much. Like in Ugram, the heroine, Adya here, lands in India to complete her mother's final rites. Her life is at risk and the responsibility of protecting her falls on Deva's shoulders, who himself has been away from his hometown for over 20 years. Bilal, Deva's friend, narrates Deva's story to Adya, and that is how we get to see the story of Khansar. And perhaps that is the reason for having Adya react in many places like us, the audience. The history of this dark zone called Khansar, its constitution, there literally is a book. Its tribes, their territories, their practices, and the fight for the throne form the crux of the story. Although I had some trouble keeping track of all the details presented, I was fascinated by the amount of thought and effort and the output achieved in the world building of Khansar. Note, ceasefire is not just a cool word for the film's title, it's actually a thing in Khansar. Production designer T.L. Venkatachalapathi's work is commendable. Everything about the production design is grand and detailed. Vishnu's final rites scene is just one example. DOP Bhuvan Gowda gives this film a KGF-like treatment, but also goes above and beyond that. They both together deserve a major credit for convincingly selling Khansar to us. From a production standpoint as well, Hombale Films has gone all out in empowering and enabling the vision of the director and his crew. The only thing that felt a little off as far as Khansar was concerned was the mix of English in the dialogues. I get the logic, but it simply didn't sound right. Apart from Khansar, the other thing one gets to see in this film in abundance is blood. Anbarivu's fights are stylishly choreographed and edited. If you are a fan of slashing, axes, machetes, guns, launchers, gadgets, you may love this film. Now, be it in the world of Khansar or the action sequences, the one man who has delivered magic is this film's music director, Ravi Basroor. It's his finest work thus far. Just like Khansar, the score of this film is rich, modern, yet deeply rooted in mainstream mass masala cinema. Prashanth Neel makes the best use of Prabhas's persona and gives Prabhas and his fans the film that perhaps they were longing for. Barring a couple of lighter moments, Prabhas is mostly in a serious mood, speaks very little and has underplayed, but with panache. Prithviraj's presence, voice and his Telugu do exactly what was required. He too doesn't get a very complex role as such, but his combination with Prabhas works perfectly well. Of course, there were flashes of KGF. boys saluting the hero, a young chai serving boy, and Rudra posing like Garuda was a nice meta element. Another thing that reminded me of KGF is that this film too is one set piece after another. I was curiously waiting to see what the next scene would be than being fully invested in the story. Meaning, for me, the excitement was more from my own anticipation of what Prashanth Neel would give us in the next scene and how Prabhas would explode and take it higher with every new scene than things like what would happen to their friendship or what would happen to the heroine. Salaar's screenplay pretty much uses KGF's technique. That is, to mention about a thing, to give us a glimpse of that thing, and then to keep building it up with dialogues through multiple characters until the thing is finally revealed. Tell, show, tell, and then show. The dialogues and some expressions are deliberately crafted for the purpose of exaggeration, also called elevation nowadays. The throne of Khansar is temporarily vacant, and that sets off the Game of Thrones. There are two major episodes inside of that. One, the entire voting episode, and the other is the Mahara episode, which is also linked to it. Just to give you an idea of how scaled up this film is, the sets of just the Mahara episode seemed bigger than the entire Narachi sets in KGF Chapter 1. Anyway, what happens in the Mahara episode and the follow-up scene in Velamgadi is pretty regular as an idea. However, where Prashanth Neel and his team make it stand out is in its execution. Finest mastery in today's filmmaking. That can be said about the entire film too. The story is as old as the hills, quite literally, because we are talking about Khansar 1,000 years ago. However, on a serious note, this actually is Prashanth Neel's Mahabharata. We have a Duryodhana in Varadaraja Mannar and Karna in Deva. That is why we see the sun or some fire in Prabhas's background in most of the scenes. Also, we have a Shakuni and half-siblings as well. The most violent men called one man the most violent. The film lives up to its tagline, especially as far as physical violence is concerned. What would have been better if that violence also had scared us equally? And that is where this film slightly falters. I mean, there is enough and more in the film for the eyes and the ears. It just needed a little more for the soul.
GT Holidays, South India's #1 travel brand.
Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. The Chennai Silks, let the celebrations begin.